Hello everyone. Welcome back to English Stories with Izzy. I hope you're all doing well and excited to learn something new today. If you're someone who wants to speak English fluently, confidently, and naturally, then this lesson is for you. In today's video, we're discussing a very important topic, the limits of justice. Arthur, a lawyer, finds himself torn between his legal duty and his conscience when a complex case lands on his desk. The case forces him to confront the difficult choice of upholding the law or refusing to defend a criminal. Upon hearing the client's truth, Arthur realizes that justice is not simple and that his role is to defend the truth, even if it means defending a criminal. Okay, so let's dive into this compelling story. Have you ever wondered where the line is drawn between right and wrong? Between following the law and listening to your gut? What happens when the very system designed to protect us throws a curveball, forcing us to question everything we believe in? Today, we're diving headfirst into the murky waters of legal ethics, where the pursuit of justice isn't always black and white. We'll meet Arthur, a lawyer driven by an unwavering belief in the power of the law. He's seen the system work, he's witnessed its flaws, but his faith in the ideal of justice remains unshaken. But what happens when that faith is tested? What happens when the case lands on his desk that makes him question everything? The evidence is damning, the public outcry is deafening, and Arthur finds himself caught between his duty to his client and the gnawing feeling that something isn't right. Join us as we explore the complex moral dilemmas faced by those in the legal profession, where the pursuit of justice can lead down unexpected paths, and where the line between right and wrong can become dangerously blurred. The phone rang, breaking the silence of Arthur's office. It was a new case, one of those that put him in a moral dilemma. A man accused of a crime that forced him to confront his principles. The newspapers reported the case, an act that challenged law and order, the city's outrage. The pressure was immense. Arthur took the case, as he does with all the cases that come to him. After all, everyone has the right to a defense, right? But as he delved into the details of the case, the evidence piled up, forming a grim and almost irrefutable picture. The man was guilty. The realization hit him like a bucket of cold water. Arthur, who had always believed in justice and the system's ability to find the truth, found himself facing a disturbing dilemma. How could he defend a criminal? How could he fight for someone who had committed such a heinous crime? The image of the victim, young and full of life, invaded his mind, and guilt consumed him. He tried to convince himself that it was just a job, that he was just doing his duty as a lawyer. But the voice of his conscience cried out louder, reminding him of his values, his belief in a more just world. Arthur felt lost, unsure of what to do. Arthur found himself facing an abyss. On one side, the weight of the law, the oath to defend his client, regardless of who he was or the crime he had committed. On the other hand, his conscience screamed that it was wrong, that he simply couldn't defend him. He spent sleepless nights, poring over the case, searching for a loophole, a glimmer of hope that could absolve him of the guilt that consumed him. But the evidence was clear, irrefutable. With each new detail he discovered, He sank deeper into a sea of doubt and anguish. Arthur felt like a boat adrift, lost in an ocean of uncertainty. He knew he had to make a decision, but he couldn't find the right path. His values, his principles, everything he believed in was being put to the test. He talked to friends, to other lawyers, but no one seemed to understand his dilemma.
"It's just a job, Arthur," they said.
"You're just doing your duty." But for him, it wasn't that simple. He couldn't separate the professional from the personal, duty from conscience. With each passing day, the pressure mounted. The trial was approaching, and he had to decide what kind of lawyer he wanted to be. A defender of the law, above all else, or a man who follows his values, even if it means giving up a case, a client, a career perhaps? Arthur's dilemma was cruel, a crossroads that forced him to choose between two equally difficult paths. But he knew that the answer was within him, somewhere between reason and emotion, between law and justice. After sleepless nights, dozens of cups of coffee, and countless hours of reflection, Arthur finally reached a decision. It wasn't easy, not at all. He weighed every argument, every piece of evidence, every principle. And in the end, the answer emerged, clear and undeniable. He would defend the client, but not in the way he had imagined. Arthur would not try to find loopholes in the law, nor create false alibis, nor play with the emotions of the jury. He would do what he considered right, what his conscience told him was just. He sought out the client and, with a trembling voice, explained his decision. "I will defend you," Arthur said, "but on one condition. You will tell me the truth. Everything. Without omissions, without lies, without excuses. The truth, however difficult it may be, is the only way to find justice." The client hesitated, tried to argue, but Arthur was unyielding. "If you want me to defend you, you will tell me the truth," he repeated. "It's the only way for me to do my job and sleep with a clear conscience." Faced with Arthur's insistence, the client yielded. And for the first time since the case came into his hands, Arthur heard the truth. The client, a seemingly mild-mannered accountant named Thomas Ashton, had embezzled millions from his company. But it wasn't just a simple theft. Thomas's daughter, Lily, had been diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of cancer. The exorbitant medical bills were bankrupting him. Driven to desperation, he'd taken the money, intending to pay it back as soon as Lily was well. He'd gambled everything on a desperate hope to save his daughter's life. A sad, complex story, with nuances he hadn't imagined. A story that made him understand that justice is not as simple as he thought. With the truth in his hands, Arthur felt lighter, stronger, more confident. He knew that the path would be difficult, that public opinion would condemn him, that he would be seen as a defender of criminals. But he was at peace with his decision. He had done what he considered right. The day of the trial dawned tense, like a stretched rope about to snap. Arthur felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, the weight of a future that loomed uncertain. The courtroom swarmed with people, curious faces, accusing eyes, whispers that echoed like thunder. The press, hungry for details, waited with pens and recorders in hand. Arthur entered the room hand in hand with his client, a man beaten down, with a lost look in his eyes. That handshake was a vote of confidence, a bond that united them in that crucial moment. Arthur felt his client's hand tremble, and he squeezed it tighter, conveying courage, even though inside he was also afraid. The prosecutor, with an inflamed voice, presented the evidence vehemently, as if he were accusing Arthur himself. Each word was a blow, each image a stab. Arthur listened attentively, his heart pounding, but without letting himself be shaken. He knew that the truth was more complex than that simplistic and Manichaean version. The time for the defense arrived. Arthur stood up, adjusted his tie, took a deep breath. That was the moment of truth, the time to show the jury the other side of the story. He looked at each of the jurors, searching in their eyes for a glimmer of understanding, a sign that they were willing to listen. With a trembling voice, Arthur began to speak. He didn't try to deny the crime, nor offer any excuses. He just told his client's story, the truth he had discovered, the nuances that the prosecutor had ignored. He spoke of the difficult childhood, the poverty, the violence that surrounded him. He spoke of the trauma that marked him forever, the pain he carried in his soul. He spoke of his struggle to survive, his search for meaning in life. Arthur didn't ask for forgiveness, nor absolution. He just asked for understanding. He asked that the jury see the human being behind the criminal, that they understand his motivations, that they take into account the circumstances. His speech was moving, an appeal to humanity, to compassion, to justice. He didn't manipulate the emotions of the jury, nor did he use fallacious arguments. He just told the truth, with all its nuances, with all its contradictions. The trial was long and difficult. The jury deliberated for hours, and the tension increased with each minute. Arthur waited patiently, confident that he had done his best, that he had fulfilled his role as a lawyer. But deep down, he knew that the final decision was not in his hands. Finally, the verdict. The judge stood up, cleared his throat, and announced, "Guilty." A sepulchral silence took over the courtroom. Arthur felt a knot in his throat, a mix of frustration and surprise. He expected a different outcome. He believed that the jury would understand the complexity of the situation, that they would see the human being behind the criminal. But justice, as he had learned, is not always fair. The courtroom emptied, the echoes of the trial fading. Arthur sat alone, the weight of the verdict settling upon him.
Guilty.
The word reverberated in the silence, a stark reminder of the complexities of justice. He had presented the truth, the nuanced story of Thomas Ashton, a man driven to desperate measures by a parent's love. He had shown the jury the human being behind the crime, the father willing to gamble everything for his daughter's life. Yet the law had spoken. Arthur wasn't sure if he felt defeated or strangely at peace. The case had forced him to confront the very core of his beliefs. He had wrestled with the oath he had taken, the duty he owed his client, and the nagging voice of his conscience. He had walked a tightrope between legal obligation and personal morality, and the verdict, while disappointing, didn't negate the journey. He thought about the limits of justice. It wasn't a perfect system, he knew that. It was a human construct, flawed and fallible, often swayed by public opinion and simplified narratives. It sought to categorize and punish, but it often struggled to understand the complexities of human motivation, the gray areas where desperation and good intentions could intertwine. He had defended a man who had broken the law, yes, but he had also defended the principle that everyone deserves a voice, that every story deserves to be heard, that even in the face of overwhelming evidence, the truth, in all its messy complexity, must be brought to light. He had not sought to excuse the crime, but to explain it, to offer context, to remind the legal system, and perhaps even the public, that justice demanded more than simply labeling someone guilty. The trial had been a harsh lesson. It had taught him that justice was not a destination but a journey, a constant striving for balance between competing values. It was a process of weighing evidence, considering circumstances, and acknowledging the inherent limitations of human judgment. It was about seeking truth, not just enforcing rules. Arthur stood up, a sense of resolve hardening his gaze. He knew his path wouldn't be easy. He would likely face criticism, even ostracism, for defending a convicted criminal. But he also knew that he had done what he believed was right. He had honored his oath, not just to the law, but to his own conscience. He had sought justice, not just for his client, but for the ideal itself. And that, he realized, was a victory in itself. Arthur left the courthouse with the feeling that justice, despite its flaws and limitations, was still an ideal worth fighting for. He had defended a criminal, yes, but he had defended the truth, the story behind the crime, the nuances that society and justice often ignore. He had learned that justice is not an abstract concept, a mathematical formula that applies to all cases in the same way. Justice is human, fallible, subject to errors and interpretations. And the role of the lawyer, in this context, is to be the voice of truth, the spokesperson for justice, the guardian of ethics. Arthur knew that the path would be long and difficult, that he would face many challenges, that he would be criticized, judged, misunderstood. But he was ready. He had found his limit, his point of balance between law and ethics, between duty and conscience. He had learned that justice is not only about punishing the guilty, but also about understanding the causes of crime, the motivations, the circumstances. He had learned that justice is not blind, but rather human, fallible, subject to errors and interpretations. And above all, he had learned that justice is not an end in itself, but rather a means to achieve a more just and equitable world, where everyone has the opportunity to be heard, understood, and judged with compassion. With this certainty in his heart, Arthur moved forward, ready to defend justice, not only in the courts, but also in life, in human relations, in the small gestures of everyday life. Because justice, as he had learned, begins in each of us. So, what would you do in Arthur's place? Leave your opinion in the comments, and let's discuss the limits of justice. If you enjoyed Arthur's story and his journey to understand the true meaning of justice, please like this video and share it with your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this one.